Thanks, and welcome to Denver Decides. This community partnership is dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women Voters of Denver, Interneighborhood Cooperation, and is presented by Denver 8 TV. Our mission today is to present a ballot issue forum in anticipation of the general election coming up on Tuesday, November 6th. Among the numerous amendment and ordinance questions on this year's ballot are State Propositions 109 and 110. While both initiatives concern funding for transportation, there are important distinctions between the two. Proposition 109, if passed, would authorize $3.5 billion in bonds earmarked for special projects. The funds could not be used on multimodal or mass transit, and Initiative 109 prohibits raising any taxes or fees for bond repayment, which would be required before funding education, corrections, and social services, including Medicaid. Initiative 110 would authorize $6 billion in bonds to fund transportation projects, establish the Transportation Revenue Anticipation Notes Citizens Oversight Committee, and raise the state sales tax rate by 0.62% from 2.9% to 3.52% for 20 years, starting on January 1st, 2019 through January 1st, 2039. Our format for this forum will follow a basic debate outline for opening and closing statements, cross-examination, and will include responses to questions submitted by the forum organizers. Let's begin by meeting the participants who will present and discuss the pros and cons of Proposition 109 and 110. Beginning at my right is Kelly Broff, who is with Let's Go Colorado, who will be speaking in favor of Proposition 110 and against Proposition 109. And on my left is Mike Kraus of the Independence Institute, who will be speaking for Proposition 109 and against Proposition 110. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We'll begin with a 1.5-minute opening statement for both speakers. And as you can see, our timers are right up front, so you can see them, and we'll time your statements and your answers. Ms. Broff, you're up first, speaking for Proposition 110, and you will have 1.5 minutes.
Thanks, Tamara. And thanks to INC, the League of Women Voters in the City, for this opportunity. It's been almost 30 years since we've done anything meaningful to address our transportation needs in the state of Colorado. During that time, our population has doubled. We're now contributing about half per person as we were in 1991 to fund our system. That explains why CDOT has a $9 billion project list. And our failure to fund it is costing all of us money. As a matter of fact, Denver residents alone are paying about $2,306 a year because we're not funding our transportation system. That's because you're using more gas, you're in more accidents, and damage to your vehicles because of the condition of our roads. That's why 80 organizations came together statewide to propose a solution, Proposition 110. This is 6 cents on a $10 purchase, and it will raise $790 million to fund transportation. That will allow us to address $6 billion of that $9 billion list, leverage $1.5 billion from the state, and maybe even more importantly, fund 88% of the roads that are managed by cities and counties throughout our state. Those cities and counties get to fund their highest priorities for transportation as well. The money is dedicated to transportation. It can't be used for anything else. And tourists will help pay. As a matter of fact, tourists will pay $92 million of those funds in the first year. That's why Governor Hickenlooper, over 500 organizations have endorsed us statewide, including 48 mayors, over 100 chambers and business organizations, numerous county commissioners, and we'd ask you to join us in supporting 110.
Thank you. And now the opening statement from Mike Kraus, speaking for Proposition 109.
Well, thanks. Thanks very much. We appreciate INC and the League putting this on. I actually, before I moved on to Jefferson County, I used to be on the Berkeley Regis United Neighbors Board, and so I used to attend these INC meetings. So Proposition 109 is a very simple, meaningful, and more importantly, transparent ballot measure that would indeed obligate $3.5 billion in bonding to address the Department of Transportation's Tier 1 projects list, the most critical needs around the state. And we took all transit-related projects out of that list, and those are all listed inside the ballot measure. The carrying costs on the bonding is about, according to Legislative Council staff, is $270 million a year. And we actually don't think that that needs to be affect any of the things that were mentioned in the beginning, healthcare, education, et cetera, because it's going to, frankly, we have a budget surplus, and there's going to be even more coming down the road, which I can get to in a little bit. So we really just think that we're just asking for a tiny fraction of the state budget and a piece of the surplus that's coming our way to pay these bonds back. We simply don't think it's necessary to have a tax increase for transportation. And you know, the fundamental difference between 110 and 109 is that we think that right now our critical need are road and bridge infrastructure, and so that we don't need a tax increase that also includes multimodal and transit, when what we really should be addressing is roads and bridges. Okay.
And now, Mr. Kraus, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal to Ms. Brav's opening statement.
Well, I think she makes a good case that, that it has been a while since Colorado has put money into our transportation. A few years back, we passed some what's called the faster fees on our vehicle registrations that was supposed to go to roads and bridges. Unfortunately, some of that money is actually being siphoned off and subsidizing a statewide bus service called Bustang to compete with the private sector. So even when the legislature does something that's supposed to be specifically for roads and bridges, what ends up happening is some of that just ends up heading off down the road.
That's 30 seconds.
Oh, wow, that went fast. Thank you, appreciate that.
And Ms. Brav, now you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Stop actually means stop.
That's right.
So we do agree that we need to fund our transportation system, but 109 is proposing that it take its money from your school kids and patients. Right now, we fund higher ed 48 out of 50th in the country, 55% of the school districts in the state of Colorado on our 4-day school week, and 1 out of 4 Coloradans receive Medicaid. These are working families who are desperately dependent on these resources that are being provided by our state. 109 will take $261 million out of those very areas to fund transportation. We think all of them are important, and you should vote for 110 instead.
That's time. Thank you. Those rebuttals, yeah, really do go fast. Now for our cross-examination rounds, beginning with Ms. Brav. You may ask Mr. Kraus a question, and Mr. Kraus, you have 1 minute to reply. So,
Great.
Kelly.
This part's kind of fun. So here's my question. 109 really hurts education and healthcare to pay for transportation. How would you justify to parents, teachers, kids, and patients that transportation is more important than healthcare and education?
Well, I don't think we have to. In addition to the sales tax increase that's being asked for 110, there's actually an income tax increase coming our way due to a federal tax change. And let me explain very quickly, hopefully within a minute. Under the new federal, what we call the Trump tax cuts, when you list your adjusted gross income on your federal tax form, that number is going to be higher than it used to be because deductions and credits went away, but rates went down, so that doesn't really matter. When you transfer that number over to your state income tax form, it's going to be larger than it has been before. And so this is actually a windfall to the state of Colorado. In fact, Ledge Council estimates $300 million next year, and by 2024, they estimate over $800 million a year in new revenue. And so all we're asking is for a little portion of that to go to roads and bridges, so nothing should have to give way to pay back this bonding.
Okay. Now, Mr. Kraus, you may ask Ms. Brav a question.
This is actually, I've been very curious about this. This is really, as I've read through 110, I see in there that and I believe it might be the first time ever, that 110 doesn't just allow for capital construction of transit projects around the state, interregional transit. It also, for the first time, allows for actual subsidizing of operational costs for interregional transit. And so my question is, if we start making the operation of transit dependent on a sales tax that's going to go away in 20 years, what happens after 20 years? Does this now mean that all this transit will have to start doing what RTD is doing today, which is cutting back service and raising ridership fees?
So what 110 really does is allows every local community to identify its most critical priorities. And whether that's bus service for seniors, which could be considered transit, or it's to address local plowing needs to keep their highways and roads open in the winter. It is 100% a local priority that will guide that. It goes away in 20 years, so we as taxpayers get to decide if the results were delivering what we expected. It also can go to capital projects that are critical for those communities. And it will absolutely go to capital projects by the state of Colorado, 6 billion of them.
Okay. Let's continue with cross-examination, and this time, Mike, you can ask Kelly a question,
Oh, great.
and Kelly, you'll have 60 seconds to answer.
Kelly, if 110 passes, sales taxes, the combined sales taxes are going to be over 9% in places like Glenwood Springs and Niwot, over 10% in Eagle and Empire, and actually over 11% in places like Silverthorne and Winter Park. Mayor Suthers in Colorado Springs, who has endorsed 109, and one of the reasons he has done this is he actually has a concern that if sales taxes are pushed up that high, that local governments are going to have a problem asking their local residents for tax measures for local needs. Do you not share his concern?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the reason 110 only proposes a 0.62 increase is because when you look at what we pay in sales tax, that's only about a 7 or 8% increase overall for every resident in the state of Colorado. Colorado Springs does have a higher sales tax, so I understand some concern there. But throughout the state, we have over 50 mayors who have endorsed us. We have countless county commissioners. It's why local communities recognize that they are getting these dollars. They're coming into their community and addressing their needs.
Okay, now Kelly, you may ask Mike a question, and Mike, again, you'll have 60 seconds.
So Mike, one of the things about 109 is it certainly touts that transportation is a top priority, yet it does nothing to address our local roads, which are 88% of the roads in our state. It addresses less than 25% of the state's needs in terms of that $9 billion project list. You will basically improve about 3% of the roads in the state. How will that improve our lives?
Well, you're right that it doesn't address the localized transportation needs, and we did that on purpose because we think that state tax dollars should go to state infrastructure, while local infrastructure should be funded by local tax dollars, which is one of the reasons, again, that Mayor Suthers has signed on to this. So we simply don't think that taxpayers, say, in the Western Slope should be paying for buses in Denver, or people in on southern Colorado should be paying for commuter bike paths in Boulder. We think that local communities should take care of those local needs, which is why we're concerned about the statewide sales tax increase interfering with their ability to do that.
Okay, next round 3. Kelly, you get to go first to ask Mike a question. And Mike, again, 60 seconds for your answer.
Thanks.
Mike, you mandate that money can't be used for transportation needs other than roads. Given the speed at which technology is advancing and much-needed mobility services, the example I'd use again is the example of bus service for seniors, maybe to get to doctor's appointments. Why would you limit in 109 the ability to use funds for those kinds of issues?
Well, there's several reasons for that. Number one, that whether people like it or not, transit ridership is actually on the decline. Even as it's a countrywide trend, but in Denver metro area, it's on the decline, even as the population grows. And you're seeing this because RTD is having to cut back train routes, or frequencies, having to raise fares, and things like one of the reasons this is happening is things like Uber and Lyft and ride sharing and driverless cars on the future are actually taking the place of some of this. And so we actually see this as a declining way to get around. And when people are given meaningful options, they actually choose their cars. And so we would like to see more vehicle infrastructure prioritized over more transit.
Now, Mike, your next question for Kelly, and Kelly, 60 seconds to answer.
So since this is a Denver forum, Denver sales tax currently is 7.65%. If 110 passes, it'll go to 8.25%. If the 4 local sales tax measures pass, it'll go to 8.93% sales tax. Now, sales taxes are regressive in nature, which means they disproportionately impact low-income people. The taxes on a gallon of milk are much larger to someone at the minimum wage than someone who makes $100,000 a year, for example. So if folks in Denver think they can only afford maybe 1 or 2 of the 5 potential sales tax measures on their ballot, do you think that they should prioritize 110 over their local sales tax measures and needs?
So first, I want to clarify that this sales tax is actually not on a gallon of milk. It's not on necessities at all, just to address this very issue, to ensure that you're not hurting families based on their need, but it's based on goods that you have discretion over that purchase. Denver's sales tax still would not be as high as compared to many other sales taxes in the state of Colorado. We think what's more important is to look at the cost you're currently paying today. The estimated cost by a national organization is over $2,000 every resident and every driver in Denver is paying. This will actually save Denver money.
Okay. Round 4, that brings us to our final cross-examination round, and Mr. Kraus, you will start it off with a question for Ms. Broff, and Kelly, you will have 45 seconds. So timers, that's a change in time, 45 seconds to answer.
So one of the reasons we put Prop 109 on the ballot was to give people an alternative to the sales tax increase. But we also want to see, we actually want to see money put into our transportation quickly. We don't see a path forward for Prop 110. We simply don't believe it's going to pass. That said, nothing guarantees that ours is going to pass either. So one of the things we're proposing is that for people who simply want to see money put into our road infrastructure as quickly as possible, that they should just go ahead and vote for both of them in the hope that at least one passes. So I guess my question is, would you join me in urging people to go ahead and vote for both and hope that one passes so we get some cash into our roads?
Yeah, I think our focus of our coalition throughout the state has been, if you want to do something meaningful and impact and improve transportation, you really do need to approve Proposition 110. 109 also puts us back in a position where you could be funding and taking money out of critical needs throughout the state. So we would not say 109 is fiscally responsible for the state of Colorado.
Okay. And now, Ms. Broff, your final question for Mr. Kraus, and Mike will have 45 seconds to answer.
Joke.
I think for our coalition, we really struggle with the response that highways are the answer to everything. Don't we reach a point where we simply can't add more lanes?
Highways aren't the answer to everything. In fact, we have never said, and we openly admit that we don't think that our measure is the be-all, end-all for all of our transportation needs in Colorado. We simply don't think that we need a sales tax increase, and that we should be using roads and bridges, the people's desire to address roads and bridges, as kind of a hook to also include a bunch of statewide transit. So we don't think it's the be-all, end-all. We did this for 3 reasons, basically. Number 1 is to give folks an alternative to a tax increase. Number 2, through the bonding, to actually require the legislature to year over year over year reprioritize spending in the Colorado state budget, and to put some immediate cash into roads and bridges. So we're not claiming that it's going to be a magic bullet. We're just going to address what is the critical road infrastructure now, and those decisions get to be made in the future.
All right, thank you. Our next few rounds will feature our speakers responding to questions submitted by our forum organizers. Each speaker will answer each question, and their responses will be 1 minute. We will begin with Kelly Broff, who is here speaking in support of Proposition 110. So Kelly, the first question is, what do you predict will happen if neither proposition passes?
Yeah, this is one of our greatest concerns if neither passes, because we believe what the state will face is each local community trying to decide, can I raise money in my own little county or city to address our own transportation needs, which means we won't have a transportation system, and we will have a number of communities who cannot address their transportation. Even if you pass your own local issue, you will never address this $9 billion project list. We think it would be devastating for the state, not only for us as residents, but our quality of life would diminish.
Okay, and now Mike Kraus, who is here speaking for Proposition 109 and against Proposition 110. Your response to the question, please.
Same question.
Yes.
If neither one passes, then we basically go back to where we were last year. This gets kicked back to the legislature. They've been debating this for several sessions. In fact, Senate Bill 1 passed this last session, which was going to refer a measure to the ballot to address transportation. An interesting thing happened in the last 3 days of the legislative session. They went ahead and stripped $1.7 billion in debt financing for roads out of something that had been passed the year before, if either of these passes, and then put off sending Senate Bill 1 to the ballot until 2019 to see what happens this year. So if neither one passes, there will likely be a measure on the 2019 ballot passed by the legislature. You might not like it. That could change. But anyway, everything goes back to where it was at the beginning of this legislative session, and they have to take it back up, basically.
Okay, the next question from our organizers for our guests. And Mike, you will respond first, and you have 1 minute to answer. The question is, will your preferred proposition, in fact, fix the damn roads? I like saying that.
Our preferred proposition, which is Proposition 109, will indeed fix some damn roads. Again, it's not a silver bullet. It addresses about 66 projects that CDOT considers critical for road and bridge infrastructure statewide. So yes, it will fix some damn roads.
Okay. Kelly, you have 60 seconds to answer that same question.
Proposition 109 will fix 3% of your dam roads, and you won't notice it. So it will have no improvement in your quality of life. And the reality is, even with increased revenue coming into the state of Colorado, it is already projected we're hitting our TABOR limits, our Taxpayer Bill of Rights. We will be refunding dollars back to taxpayers, so that money can't be put into transportation, healthcare, or education. That's the challenge before us.
Okay, let's continue on with our questions and submitted from our organizers. And Ms. Broff, you will respond first, and you will have 1 minute to answer. Numerous studies have shown that highway expansion leads to a similar uptick in traffic. How does your preferred ordinance address congestion on Colorado roads?
The truth is, what causes congestion is more people driving on the roads. And what we see is the cost of that when we fail to invest at all is huge for all of us in the state of Colorado. I mentioned it's over $2,000 for Denver residents. Throughout the state, it's about $1,700 for every driver in the state of Colorado. So that congestion has to be addressed. CDOT's $9 billion project list is focused on projects that get at that congestion. Those local communities will focus on projects in their local communities, including technology and improvements to your roads.
Okay, and now, Mr. Kraus, your response.
Well, I think what we're seeing that despite an effort by a fair number of people out there to make things as uncomfortable as possible for motorists to try and get them out of their cars, that people actually prefer their vehicles, their privately owned vehicles, or ride sharing. We're seeing this because we're seeing transit ridership actually decrease even as our population goes up and the number of people commuting stays roughly the same. So rather than trying to force a square peg into a round hole, which is to do some kind of massive project in an effort to try and squeeze people into something they might not want, we're just saying let's expand what people do want, which is roads and bridges, and try and ease congestion that way.
Okay, and our final round of submitted questions, and Mike, you'll be the first to answer. Who are the major contributors that help bring this initiative to the ballot?
So we spent a little under $400,000 getting on the ballot, and that came out of the Independence Institute's savings accounts that we had tucked away for years and years and years for the ability to do just that. We've gotten some small contributions to help with that signature gathering cost through a fundraising effort we did on a crowdsourcing website called FreedomFi. And beyond that, the money that has been spent by us on this measure has come from the general operating money of the Independence Institute, which would be foundation and individual donors.
Okay, thank you.
No specific, I guess my point is there's no specific funder for this.
And Kelly, your response.
We have a broad base of support for our initiative. It includes business organizations throughout the state of the Colorado. You'll see nonprofits and environmental groups all coming together with our contractors and our local mayors and communities to say this is a critical initiative for us to get across the finish line and improve our quality of life.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us to the end of our Q&A segment, and we now move on to closing statements. Each speaker will have 1 minute, 1.5 minutes rather, for a closing statement. And we will reverse the order of the opening statements, which means we'll begin with Mike Kraus. Mike, you have 90 seconds for your closing statement, please.
So for years, the Colorado budget has been growing significantly. In fact, the baseline spending is up over $1 billion over just the last couple of years. Yet all this time, and we have We have found money to build in CDOT, a new headquarters, but we don't have money for roads and bridges. We just gave North Face $20 million to move a corporation here that doesn't need a taxpayer subsidy to do it. We have found money. We use money from our faster vehicle registration fees to fund a statewide bus service. So people keep telling us there's no money for roads, yet there seems to be tons of money for all these other things, and all we're saying is we just want to take a tiny fraction of that state budget and reprioritize it to roads and bridges. Actually, transportation is actually a smaller percentage of the state budget than it was a decade ago, while something like Medicaid has increased over 200%. So all we're asking is for the legislature to reprioritize transportation in the state budget, and we think that 109 is the way to force that hand.
Okay, thank you. Kelly, closing statement from you, 90 seconds.
As we've said, it's been 30 years almost since we've done anything meaningful with our transportation system. And our failure to invest is costing all of us real money. And the reality is, the state, while it has had increased revenue, is already hitting the Tabor limits, so it doesn't have the resources to dedicate to transportation. For 6 cents on a $10 purchase, we can generate $790 million a year. We can address $7.5 billion of that project list that CDOT has, and we can make sure our local communities can improve their communities and address their transportation priorities. All of the money in 110 is dedicated to transportation. It can't be moved anywhere else, and when we hit a recession and things will slow down, we will still have the revenue stream to pay off the bonds and to continue supporting our local communities' needs. We choose in 110 that tourists help us pay, not our school kids and not our patients in the state of Colorado, but tourists. Join with us, Governor Hickenlooper, and 500 organizations who have sponsored us throughout the state. Say yes to Proposition 110.
All right, now it's the audience's turn. Let's show our appreciation to our speakers for their participation. Thank you to you both. We hope we've given you a fair look at the pro and con arguments for Propositions 109 and 110. Again, if passed, these initiatives would authorize funding for transportation projects. Proposition 109, through $3.5 billion in bonds earmarked for specific projects, the funds could not be used on multi-module or mass transit. And Initiative 109 prohibits raising any taxes or fees for bond repayment, while Proposition 110 would authorize $6 billion in bond funds, establish the Transportation Revenue and Anticipation Notes Citizens Oversight Committee, and raise the state sales tax rate by 0.62% from 2.9% to 3.52% for 20 years, starting on January 1st, 2019 through January 1st, 2039. Our thanks also to the Denver Decides partners, which include Interneighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. Remember, the election is Tuesday, November 6th. Let your voice be heard. Be sure you are registered and be sure to vote. For complete election information online, go to denverdecides.com. I'm Tamara Banks. Thanks for joining us.